Today, we got a 4th of July mailbag. Who will be the most impactful transfer, not named Riley Leonard, and what young quarterback is going to emerge this season? All that and more coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And you know what day it is. It is the 4th of July. So before we get to anything else, happy 4th. I hope you're enjoying a really nice day off and potentially a long weekend. I really appreciate you joining me here on this holiday. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And if you're watching this episode on YouTube, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Okay, with it being a holiday, I thought it would be fun to hear from you and do another mailbag episode. I did one last week, got a ton of great questions, so I wasn't even able to answer them all. But today, that is my goal, along with a few nice additional ones that I got over these past couple of days. So thank you to you if you sent one in. You guys always deliver and make my job easier. Real quick, though, if you are watching along on YouTube, apologies for the fact that it looks and probably sounds a little bit like I'm trapped in some insane asylum with the all-white backdrop. As I said at the end of yesterday's show, I moved places recently, and I'm still in the process of setting up my new studio, my new home office. So I just wanted to address that off the top. But now let's get to what you came here for. That is the mailbag questions. And our first one comes from T Walker 88, who asks, who will be the most impactful transfer not named Riley Leonard this season? My guess is Chris Mitchell. That is T Walker suggesting Chris Mitchell. And honestly, that's a good guess. I'm going to go with Tyler Buchner. I'm kidding. I'm not going to take Tyler Buchner, although I do think we're going to see him, and he's going to get a carry or a catch this season, and it's going to be a really cool moment. Chris Mitchell is a good pick, to be honest with you. I think I might be underrating him in a way. When you look at his stats last season at Florida International, they're really good, man. And maybe that's partially because we haven't seen a Notre Dame wide receiver put up these kind of numbers since 2019. But when you look at it, he had 60 receptions, over 1,100 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Those are big numbers, and you don't do that by accident. You have to be a good player to put up those kind of numbers. And when you watch his film, it was clear that Florida International was just feeding him the ball. He was the best player on that offense, most dynamic guy, and the guy that they trusted in big situations. He was also a big play threat, and that is what Notre Dame really wants. That's really why Notre Dame wanted him in the first place. But my concern about those numbers that although they're big, he only played one team in the Power 5 last season, and that was an Arkansas team who finished 4-8. So it's great that he put up big numbers against Arkansas, because he did. He had a huge game, 6 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown in a 24-point loss to the Razorbacks. He had an 80-yard touchdown reception against them. So it's not like he's completely unfamiliar to top-quality competition, but even though Arkansas is in the SEC, they were not a very good team last year. So take that with a grain of salt. That being said, he's definitely going to have a role for this Notre Dame team this season. It looks like he's going to be their big play threat. He scored the game-winning touchdown in the spring game, although I don't put a ton of stock into that play because he was going up against a walk-on cornerback who literally fell down in the play. Like, I think me or you could have scored a touchdown on that play, but still, Chris Mitchell is going to be a deep threat for this Notre Dame team. And I think that the other transfer wide receivers are also going to have a role as well. Jayden Harrison, the transfer from Marshall, when he first committed to Notre Dame, I thought, okay, cool, he's a good returner, but I didn't expect him to have any sort of impact on the wide receiver room. But based on what I've heard from what he did in spring practice, the other receivers raved about him. The coaching staff said, hey, this dude is a different type of fast, especially in short space. So I think he's going to have a role in the slot. And then you've got Bo Collins, who's one of the first guys to commit to Notre Dame out of the transfer portal. Chris Mitchell, I think, was the first, or maybe it was Jordan Clark. Either way, Jordan Clark, Chris Mitchell, they committed around the same time. I'm going to get to Jordan Clark in a second here, but Bo Collins probably has the best chance to be a day one starter because he's more of a true boundary wide receiver. Notre Dame doesn't really have that right now, even though Jaden Thomas's frame might suggest that he's a boundary. He's actually been more effective in the slot so far in his career, but Notre Dame is loaded at slot. They've got Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, Jayden Harrison. So I don't know how many slot receiver reps are going to be there to go around. So receiver is going to be more of a rotation. I don't know if you can pencil in any of these guys to be a starter every single game or really in the top 3 of Notre Dame's rotation. They're going to play a lot, but I think you got to look towards the defense to find out who's going to be the most impactful transfer outside of Riley Leonard, because there are three very good options on that side of the ball. You've got Rod Hurd, the safety from Northwestern. You've got R.J. Oben, who is the defensive end transfer from Duke, or Jordan Clark, who I talked about earlier, from Arizona State. Personally, I'm taking R.J. Oben to be the most impactful transfer out of any of these guys, which is kind of funny that Notre Dame's top two most impactful transfers are going to come from Duke, a team that barely lost to Notre Dame last season. But here's why I'm taking Oben. Okay, his career stats sort of speak for themselves. He's got 14 career sacks, including 5 last season at Duke, and he's been a really impactful player for the past 3 seasons. He had 5 last year, 4 the year before that, and then 5 the year prior. So he's put up consistent numbers over the course of the past 3 years. And when you look at what he's replacing, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and you compare JJB's numbers in 2022 with the Buckeyes to what Oben did last year at Duke, they're pretty similar. And Notre Dame wants Oben to be as good as Javonte Jean-Baptiste was last season. I don't think that anyone is really talking about JJB that much this time last year. And then by the end of last season, he was clearly one of Notre Dame's best players on offense and defense. He's one of the best players on the entire team. So let's compare the stats. In 2022, JJB had 4 sacks, 7 quarterback hurries, and 10 run stops at Ohio State. Granted, he played less than 300 snaps that season because Ohio State just has so many really good defensive ends. Last year, Oben played about 400 snaps, so around 125 more than what Javonte Jean-Baptiste did. And Oben had 5 sacks, 14 quarterback hurries, and 9 run stops. So both very effective players during their times at their former schools. But the big thing here is R.J. Oben is going to start for Notre Dame day one, and I don't really have any questions about his fit in the defense. Sure, there might be some concerns about Oben's ability to stop the run, but there were concerns about Javonte Jean-Baptiste's ability to stop the run, and he quieted those really in that game against his former team, Ohio State, when he was out there for basically every single play of that game and just poured his heart and soul into that game. I was absolutely crushed for a million reasons after that game, but specifically for him after the performance that he put on against his former team. So with Oben, he's never really going to be asked to play that many snaps. There's a lot more younger guys and more depth this year on this Notre Dame front that are going to be able to come in, particularly if he needs help in the run game. But I think he's going to be a threat getting after the passer, especially in big third down situations when he can just sort of pin his ear back and go after the quarterback. And Notre Dame has a great interior, Howard Cross and Riley Mills, that are going to eat up double teams, and I think that makes life easier for the guys on the edge. Jordan Patello, he can get after the quarterback a little bit, but I don't think he's as good as R.J. Oben is. So I expect a big year out of R.J. Oben. Maybe that's wishful thinking and hoping that he can just replicate what Javonte Jean-Baptiste did last season, but I really do think that he's the safe pick, because with Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd, they're both going to start this season as well, most likely with Clark at the nickel, Hurd at the safety position opposite Xavier Watts. But I do have my concerns about those guys. Clark's numbers were not great for Arizona State last season. His film was not much better. Now, he has said, and the coaches have said over and over and over again, that Clark was playing through an injury throughout last season, and I don't doubt that. I'm not saying that they're lying. And obviously, if you're playing through an injury, you're not going to be as good as if you are fully healthy. But still, I can't really get that out of my head just yet. So I think once I sort of see it, then I'll start to believe it, that he can be a really impactful player for Notre Dame this upcoming season as well. And then with Rod Hurd, he was really good at Northwestern, but he played the nickel, and Notre Dame is going to ask him to play safety this year. So I think that is going to be a transition. There's probably going to be some bumps in the road for him along the way, but he's very experienced. He's played in a lot of different defensive schemes. So I think he's going to be a good player. But in terms of the most impactful, outside of Riley Leonard, I'm taking R.J. Oben. All right, when we come back, is it too early to think about who's going to be the starting quarterback in 2025? Maybe, but that doesn't mean we can't predict who's going to emerge this season. That's next. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks, or if you're feeling spontaneous and want to hit up the nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. It is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I went pretty long in that first question, so I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker on these next one. And this next one comes from @HoltzMyBeer, which is a great name. I think @HoltzMyBeer has submitted questions before because I do recognize it. And you know what? It deserves a shout out every single time. Holtz wants to know, who do you think is going to be the starting quarterback in 2025? My preference is Minchie because he seems the best fit for Mike Denbrock's offense. That is what HoltzMyBeer is saying. But I would agree. I do think that it's going to be Kenny Minchie next season, which might surprise some people. Now, despite the fact that Angeli is the backup right now at Notre Dame and he does have eligibility next season, pretty much everyone is writing him off as the starter for next season, and I am one of those people. I do not think Steve Angeli is going to be on the roster this time next year because I think he's going to be beaten out by one of the younger guys in Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr. And once that happens, there's really no reason for Steve Angeli to stay at Notre Dame unless he's okay with being a career backup. But honestly, Angeli is too good for that, so I do think that he is going to be taking his talents elsewhere. As I talked about in the quarterback preview episode a couple days ago, I truly think that Minchie or Carr is really going to emerge this season, despite the fact that they aren't going to be playing a lot on Saturdays, or at least we don't think they're going to be playing a lot on Saturdays this year. What goes on that practice field over the course of this fall is probably going to determine who the starting quarterback is going to be next season. Now, it's a lot to ask of CJ Carr to come in and assert himself as better than both Kenny Minchie, who's a very talented quarterback who's been around 1 year longer than him, and Steve Angeli in the course of 1 calendar year. Now, it has certainly happened before. Young quarterbacks have shined, and they have developed in a very short span of time that they earn that starting job next season. But I think that it's just a lot to ask for Carr. And I also am really high on Kenny Minchie. When he committed to Notre Dame out of high school and he committed at the very last hour after he flipped from Pittsburgh, I loved the commitment partially because I knew how upset it made Pat Narduzzi, the head coach of Pittsburgh. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I'm not the biggest fan of Pat Narduzzi, nor is Notre Dame. And for that matter, Pat Narduzzi hates Notre Dame. So I think it's equal hatred going there both sides. But when he committed, I was like, oh, wow, this guy is actually really good. He's an Elite 11 finalist. I think he has the demeanor to be a great college quarterback. And even though we barely saw him play last season, he did not look good in the spring game. But then again, that was like his first ever time out there in Notre Dame Stadium. I do not really put anything into that. He looked really good in the spring game. Yes, he did have a complete boneheaded mistake when he just threw an interception that he absolutely should not have thrown right into the hands of Luke Talich. But still, he also made some throws where you're like, whoa. That's really impressive. And he also showed off his running ability in a way that I did not expect from him. I knew he could run. I did not know he was that good of a scrambler. So you're right, HoltzMyBeer. I think he works perfectly in Mike Denbrock's offense. But then again, so does CJ Carr, because CJ Carr can run as well. So it's really going to come down to those two guys. And I'm going to take Minchie because I think that extra year in college is so valuable, even if Minchie doesn't play that much on Saturdays in the fall. I'm really excited about CJ Carr. I think he's going to be great at Notre Dame. And now with Deuce Knight committed, I think we're almost forgetting about what type of player CJ Carr could become. But I just think we're going to have to wait a little bit. I think Kenny Minchie is going to be given the first shot next season to be the starting quarterback. But it could be one of those deals where that competition could sort of last into the season. And, depending on how Minchie performs in his first season as the starter, if he does win that job, and CJ Carr, if he keeps improving and he just makes it harder and harder on the coaching staff to not play him in practice. Like it's happened before. Sometimes quarterback competitions don't necessarily end as cleanly as you would hope. And there's a real chance that happens next year because, if things go how I expect them to with Angeli transferring and then a quarterback battle between Minchie and Carr, it is going to be the only thing we talk about next offseason. And it's going to be a lot of fun because both of those guys are really talented and they have really bright futures. But I do think Minchie is going to win the job. All right, next question. R2 Saint 24 Since the news came out about Tyson Ford, what about the status of Brennan Vernon? Is it now or never for him as well? So if you aren't familiar with what R2 Saint 24 is talking about, Tyson Ford is no longer on the team. He is on medical scholarship now, and this is just the way it is in college football. Notre Dame is over the scholarship limit. They had to get down. Tyson Ford was absolutely buried on the depth chart, and he stepped away from the team for personal reasons in spring practice, and I just don't think there was a spot for him on this Notre Dame roster. Best wishes to him. It was disappointing that his career did not turn out like we had hoped when he was a high 4-star prospect coming out of high school. But now Notre Dame is dealing with a somewhat similar situation in Brennan Vernon, because it's too early to say now it's now or never for Brennan Vernon. I'm not saying that at all. He's only been on campus for 1 year and he redshirted last season. But here's what I'm going to say about Brennan Vernon. He still has the opportunity to be a very productive player at Notre Dame down the line. I don't think Vernon is ever going to live up to the expectations that were put on him when he was a 5-star prospect and committed to Notre Dame over Ohio State. This was a big, big deal when Brennan Vernon committed, because at the time, everyone in the world thought he was going to Ohio State. He plays for Mentor, Ohio, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, public schools in all of Ohio. They're a great football program. I have family that went to Mentor. I'm very familiar with the program. And at the time he committed, I was so ecstatic. It was also very early on in the Marcus Freeman tenure at Notre Dame, so it was looked at as a huge recruiting win and hopefully a sign of things to come for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail. But unfortunately for Brennan Vernon, he fell from a consensus top 50 prospect before his senior year of high school to outside the top 200 when all the rankings were said and done. I watched Brennan Vernon play my cousin twice. He was a non-factor in those games in the defensive line. Now, some of you have probably heard me talk about this before. My cousin and their team, Medina, that's the same high school that Drew Aller, the quarterback for Penn State, went to. They ran a 5-wide air raid offense where it's not your normal offense that you go up against in high school football. Like, the quarterback would take the snap almost 9 yards in the backfield, and he would have all this time to run around, and the defense would have to drop 8 guys back in coverage because the only time that this team ever ran the ball was with the quarterback. So when you're trying to evaluate a defensive line prospect, this is not the best offense to sort of judge him on, but still, he was a non-factor in these games, and he wasn't able to get by some of these offensive linemen who were not very big, because he didn't really have to be that big to play on this offensive line for Medina, and he just wasn't really making an impact. And I was really focusing on him throughout much of the game, and I just expected to see more. So I was like, hey, I don't know if he's going to be as good. I wasn't like writing him off or anything, but certainly there were some red flags there, and I think that if you look at his other performances in high school as well, that also plays into the fact that he dropped in this ranking. So then he got to Notre Dame, and he had to lose a lot of bad weight because Notre Dame wanted to put him at defensive end, and he was too heavy. And as it happens a lot of times with guys coming out of high school, they're like big kids, but that weight it might be a little bit too much fat. You need more lean muscles. So then he lost a bunch of weight, and then Notre Dame, I think the coaching staff realized, hey, he's probably not best suited to play defensive end in college. He's probably better off playing the 3 technique. And if you're playing the 3 technique, you need to be bigger and stronger. So now Brennan Vernon is going through another body change where he has to bulk up. This is not uncommon for defensive line prospects coming out of high school, where they get on campus and then you're like, okay, now that you see him going up against other college players, your perception of that player and where they're best suited to play changes. And I think that's exactly what happened with Brennan Vernon. But next year, he's going to have a great chance to play with Howard Cross and Riley Mills out the door. So next year, it's not necessarily a now or never type season. He doesn't have to start next season for him to eventually have a good year or a good career at Notre Dame, but he should at least be in the rotation in 2025. If he's not, it's probably not a good sign, and he's going to have to look elsewhere. Okay, one more question here before we head to the break. This one is a long question, so bear with me here. This one comes from Michael Mahoney. Michael says, I posed this question numerous times to various podcast hosts since January and have been mocked and laughed at every turn. Yikes, Michael. I'm sorry about that. But Michael would go on to say, since Gerby Lambert has arrived on campus at 318 pounds, I feel even more passionate that Emil Wagner needs to move to the defensive line. Now, Michael types out a really long explanation about Lambert's weight compared to Wagner's and basically says that Wagner is never going to be anywhere close to big enough to play the tackle position in college, so he should just switch over to D-line. Michael, I'm not going to laugh at you or mock you or anything like that. I understand your point. I'd actually agree with you that Gerby Lambert projects as a better offensive tackle than Emil Wagner, given his somewhat freakish size, but probably not this season. I also think that you're underestimating how difficult that transition is from offensive tackle to the defensive line, even if Emil Wagner is a really good athlete. But just because they're big bodies and they can move well with their feet, that doesn't mean the skill sets are directly translatable. So if you were to switch Emil Wagner to defense, it's going to take him at least a year, maybe two, to learn the fundamentals of the position to play at the college level. Even if he played it in high school, it is so much different going up against like high school offensive linemen in Dayton, Ohio, which is where he's from, compared to going up against real quality offensive linemen in college. So you're basically punting on 1 year, maybe two, for Emil Wagner, when there is a very real chance that Notre Dame needs Emil Wagner this season. Like if Wagner stays at offensive tackle, there's a good chance that he starts at some point this year. I think that eventually this season, Wagner is going to beat out Tosh Baker to be the starting right tackle. I'm not sure if it's going to happen before the season opener. It might make more sense to put out Baker, given the fact that he's been around for so long and he's bigger, especially going into College Station week 1. But I think Emil Wagner is really going to surprise some people this year. And even though he's a little bit undersized, and there's going to be times where like, man, he got bull rush on that play, that can't happen. I just feel like if you move him, you risk it's too big of a risk to move a guy to a new position because it might work out for them better down the road when he is going to be needed at his current position this year. So, Michael, I hope that answer is good enough, and I hope that I treated it respectfully, unlike all these other people who didn't share that same sentiment. But when we come back, Notre Dame might be soft launching a new uniform that honestly doesn't look very good. More on that right after this. All right, our next question comes from @NathanColeman45. Thoughts on the potential uniform changes with the gold ND logo on the sleeves? Okay, so if you've been following the story, you know what Nathan's talking about. But if you haven't, I'll enlighten you. Once the EA Sports college football video game trailer came out, a lot of people noticed that when Notre Dame players were shown on the trailer, the uniform looked a little bit different. They had a gold ND monogram on the sleeves as opposed to the traditional white ND monogram with the gold trim. I think a lot of people were like, hold on now. Is that just a flaw in the game? Did they get the uniform wrong? Or is that what Notre Dame is going to do this season? And to be clear, Notre Dame has not made an official announcement about a jersey change. But then some people started noticing that they're selling this type of jersey in the Notre Dame bookstore, or at least a Notre Dame affiliated bookstore nearby campus. And if they're doing that, if they're really selling this jersey at a Notre Dame bookstore, then I got news for you. That's going to be the jersey this season. And I'll admit, when I saw it, was not a fan. And as it's been said over and over before since this news came out, jerseys do look better on players than they do in the store. That's a fact, especially with the material and the way it rests on the shoulder pads. All of that is very true. Then Adon Schuler posted a picture in uniform with shoulder pads on, and it's hard to tell because he's front-facing and you can barely see the edges of his sleeves, but in that picture, he is wearing this new uniform. So at this point, I do expect an announcement from the school about a potential uniform change. I'm going to hold off my official opinion until we get that official announcement from the school. They might also change the color of the pants to look more like a traditional gold as well. I know a lot of people have been clamoring for that for years now, and I think that might happen. So even though that the initial viewpoint into this new jersey has been a bit of a shock, and I thought that it probably would have made more sense for Notre Dame to get out in front of this and just announce it rather than these weird little moments here and there. We're like, oh, that's different in the trailer to now putting out these jerseys. Still, it makes me think that we probably haven't gotten the full scope of it yet. So again, I'm going to hold off until we do, but right now I'm just not a huge fan. I like the white monogram with the gold trim the way it is. And sure, there's some slight tweaks to the uniform that could be made to make it look a little bit better, but that is not the one that I would have made. Okay, our last question. Trey Hinton. Oh, Trey. Trey says, I was at the Ohio State game last year and still have not watched the TV version yet. Have you rewatched it yet? If so, do you recommend rewatching it? If not, do you plan on rewatching before the season? Still trying to get over that game. So I started it one day, couldn't finish it. Just couldn't do it. It's too painful knowing what was to come. And the moment that I stopped was after Rico Flores scored the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter. I think it's actually forgotten how impressive of a drive that was by the Notre Dame offense, and specifically Sam Hartman. He was dialed in on that drive, and they got the ball at their own 4-yard line, went 96 yards down the field, and it ended with a great catch by Rico Flores in the end zone to put Notre Dame up. Crowd roared. I remember being at that game, and just even though that touchdown happened on the other side of the field, like just that moment was just so exciting. And that game had just been so hard fought. And Notre Dame had been moving the ball on offense, but they just could not put the ball into the end zone. The drives kept stalling. We've heard about the fourth down conversions that Sam Hartman was not able to make time and time again. Spencer Schrader also missed a key field goal. So Notre Dame was moving the ball. They finally get in the end zone. And even though it was like I could still feel that excitement, that rush again while watching it on my television screen, I thought about what was going to happen next, and I just could not relive it. So if you're trying to rewatch it, I mean, if you really like to torture yourself, maybe it's for you. Personally, I've tried to avoid watching the Bush Push, but it seems like every single time Notre Dame and USC play each other, they have to show the highlights of that game. I've seen Dwayne Jarrett's fourth down conversion way more times than I would ever want to see again, and we all have seen the liner play as well a million times over. So I don't know. I wouldn't recommend it because you're just going to be sad. But then again, some people love sad movies. They love listening to sad music. I don't really know why. That's not really my cup of tea. But if that is your cup of tea, sure, just do it, and maybe it'll make you more mad or more motivated for Notre Dame to finally get over the hump and beat one of those teams and win on the biggest stage. I hope that the coaching staff has watched it a bunch of times because hopefully it lights a fire under their butts and they want to make sure that that never happens again, because I sure hope it doesn't. I don't really think I can handle another one of those losses if I'm being completely honest with you. But as I've said time and time again, I really, really am excited about what this team can accomplish this season. And even though there isn't a game on the regular season schedule like Ohio State last year where, months out, you're talking about like that is going to be an absolutely huge game. And it was the center of the college football universe. Notre Dame versus Texas A&M, the season opener, isn't going to be quite at that magnitude. It's still going to be a really good game. Still going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I do think that we're going to have some moments this upcoming season that we're going to rewatch over and over and over as the year goes on. So we didn't really end on a super optimistic question, but I tried to make it a little bit more positive there at the end because it is the 4th of July. You made this your first listen of the day, and I am greatly appreciative of it. But that is going to do it for today's episode. I'm going to be back next Tuesday following the holiday. I hope you enjoy a great 4th of July weekend filled with friends, family, maybe the beach or a lake, and hopefully some ice-cold adult beverages as well. In the meantime, please remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I will see you next Tuesday.